Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we enter the opulent halls of a 1930s London Freemasons banquet, where Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings attend a charity event amid whispers of corruption. When a tragic event occurs during dinner, a web of fraud, threats, and deadly deception is unveiled among trusted brothers. Join us for Shadows in the Masons' Hall, a tale of secret societies and hidden motives, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this lodge harbors our own mysteries. Before we begin, share in the comments. Where are you joining us from today? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story begin. Chapter 1. A Banquet of Shadows. I have often suspected that my friend Hercule Poirot takes a peculiar delight in gatherings where suspicion hangs thicker than the second helpings of trifle. It was with his usual cool composure then that he accepted the invitation to the Freemasons' charity banquet at the Grand Canforth Rooms. The invitation came from Sir Gerard Thistleton, the current Grand Master of the Lodge, as a thank you for Poirot's help in that ticklish matter of the misplaced government bonds, a favor that carried more weight in London circles than a chest full of medals. The July evening was beastly hot, London's air thick with heat and the weight of public scrutiny. The Lodge scandal, as the papers had dubbed it, hung over the gathering like a storm cloud. But unlike the usual atmosphere of defensive whispers, I might have expected there was an air of determined righteousness among the assembled Masons. These men weren't cowering from the allegations. They were eager to root out the corruption that threatened their ancient order. Quite a turnout despite the troubles, I observed as we approached the entrance. Indeed, Hastings, Poirot murmured, his green eyes scanning the crowd with interest. But observe, these gentlemen do not slink in shame. They march to battle. Sir Gerard Thistleton approached us with firm, measured steps, his ceremonial chain gleaming, but his expression resolute rather than worried. Poirot, Hastings, welcome to what I hope will be a cleansing evening. We stand united to support those brave enough to expose the rot in our ranks. Lady Evelyn March joined our circle, her usual social smile replaced by something more determined. Mr. Poirot, how refreshing to see someone of your reputation here. We need all the moral authority we can muster as we clean house. You speak of cleaning house, Lady Evelyn? Poirot inquired. Indeed, Edgar Linton has been conducting a thorough investigation into the property irregularities. Rather than hide from the scandal, we've decided to support his efforts completely. Better to cut out the cancer ourselves than let it fester. John Avery, the lodge secretary, materialized beside us with nervous energy. Gentlemen, Lady Evelyn, quite right about Edgar's work, though I must say some of us worry about the methods. This publicity, these confrontational tactics. The truth fears no scrutiny, John, Sir Gerard replied firmly. Edgar has my full backing. Whatever evidence he's uncovered, we want it brought to light. Dr. Marcus Peaton approached our group, his medical bag in hand as always. Unlike the others, his manner seemed distinctly uncomfortable. Evening all? Rather a charged atmosphere for a charity function, wouldn't you say? Dr. Peaton, Poirot observed mildly, you seem less enthusiastic about Mr. Linton's investigation than your colleagues. The doctor's laugh was strained. I simply believe in discretion, Mr. Poirot. Some wounds heal better without constant probing. But then, I'm merely the lodge physician. Matters of policy are above my station. Marcus has been cautious about supporting Edgar's methods, Sir Gerard explained diplomatically. He worries about lodge morale. What concerns me, Dr. Peaton said, adjusting his bag nervously, is the strain this is placing on certain members. Edgar's health, for instance, The man's heart condition is worsening under all this pressure. I've tried to convince him to moderate his approach, but he won't listen to medical advice. From across the room, I spotted Edgar Linton himself, a thin, intense man clutching a leather briefcase. Unlike the paranoid figure I might have expected, he was surrounded by well-wishers offering encouragement, though he appeared to be declining most conversation, his eyes constantly scanning the room with nervous energy. A fellow possessed despite his intensity, I observed. As he should be, Lady Evelyn replied. Edgar's doing the lodge a tremendous service. Of course, not everyone appreciates having their past actions examined so closely. Her gaze flickered toward Dr. Peaton, who'd grown even more uncomfortable during our conversation. I should check on some of the other members, he muttered, excusing himself quickly. Dr. Peaton seems rather eager to avoid the topic, Poirot noted. Marcus has been resistant to the investigation from the start, Sir Gerard admitted. Claims it's unnecessary, that the lodge's reputation will suffer. But I've told him corruption is what damages our reputation, not exposing it. Before we could discuss the matter further, Edgar Linton himself approached our group. Up close, he looked tired but determined, his eyes bright with the fervor of a crusader, though I noticed his hands had a slight tremor as he gripped his briefcase. Sir Gerard, Lady Evelyn, he nodded to each in turn, and the famous Hercule Poirot. Your reputation for uncovering truth precedes you, sir. Mr. Linton, I understand you are conducting important work for the lodge. The most important work of my life, Linton replied passionately. For too long, a few corrupt individuals have traded on our good name for personal profit. But I have the evidence now. He patted his briefcase. Everything needed to expose them, once and for all. And you feel secure in this evidence? Poirot asked carefully. Linton's expression grew troubled. As secure as one can be when dealing with desperate people. I've been receiving anonymous threats, typed notes warning me to abandon my investigation, let sleeping dogs lie, and worse. But I won't be intimidated. Anonymous threats? Lady Evelyn looked genuinely concerned. Edgar, you should have told us. I didn't. Want to worry anyone? Besides, I've taken precautions. My secretary, Miss Sinclair, has been invaluable. She understands the importance of this work. Miss Sinclair, she's the young French woman who assists you, Sir Gerard inquired. Indeed. Her uncle is a lodge member, so she understands what's at stake. She's been helping me organize the evidence, ensuring everything is properly documented. As if summoned by our conversation, Mademoiselle Sinclair approached. She was a striking young woman with an unmistakably French elegance, but her face bore the strain of recent weeks. Mr. Linton, she said softly, her accent lending a musical quality to her words. Forgive the interruption, but you really must remember your heart medication with dinner. Dr. Peaton was quite specific about the timing. Ah, yes, thank you, my dear. Linton reached into his waistcoat pocket for Asmol pill bottle. She keeps better track of my health than I do, gentlemen. As he struggled briefly with the bottle's cap, Miss Sinclair gently took it from him. Here, let me help. She shook out a small white tablet and placed it beside his wine glass. There, but you must eat something substantial with it. Always looking after me, Linton said gratefully. I don't know what I'd do without her assistance. Before we could continue, the dinner gong sounded and we were ushered toward the dining hall. Chapter 2. Death Toasted. The dining hall buzzed with an electric anticipation I'd rarely felt at such gatherings. Word of the investigation's progress had spread, and the assembled Masons seemed divided between excitement for justice and apprehension about what might be revealed. The honest members were eager for vindication, while a few others appeared distinctly uncomfortable. I found myself seated at the high table between Miss Sinclair and Dr. Peaton, with Linton directly across from us. Poirot had been placed several seats to my right, positioned where he could observe the entire table with his characteristic discretion. Sir Gerard sat at the head, making careful conversation about the evening's proceedings, while Lady Evelyn held court further down the table with tales of her charity work. "Mr. Linton," Sir Gerard ventured as the soup course arrived, "I trust tonight's presentation will be measured in its approach. Thorough enough to satisfy both the membership and any outside scrutiny," Linton replied firmly, his grip tightening on his briefcase. "The lodge deserves to know exactly who has been betraying their trust." Dr. Peaton set down his soup spoon with unusual force. "Really, Edgar, this confrontational atmosphere seems rather unseemly for a charitable gathering. Surely, these matters could be handled with more discretion." "Discretion has been tried, Marcus." Linton's voice carried an edge. "How many discreet inquiries have we had over the years? How many quiet resignations that solved nothing? But consider the potential damage to innocent reputations. The only reputations that will suffer are those that deserve to," Sir Gerard interrupted, though I sensed he was somewhat torn. "Still, Edgar, perhaps you could share the general outline with us before making everything public." "The general outline is simple," Linton replied, his breathing slightly labored from excitement. "Certain properties were sold far below their actual value, with the proceeds apparently disappearing into private accounts. The medical certifications used to justify some of these sales appear to have been falsified." Dr. Peaton's face went pale. "That's a very serious accusation, Edgar. Medical certifications are not something to be falsified for personal gain," Linton finished coldly, "which is precisely why this investigation was necessary." The tension at our table was palpable. Miss Sinclair leaned toward Linton with obvious concern. "Edgar, perhaps you should take your medication now. You know what Dr. Pemberton said about taking it with food, especially when you're agitated?" Yes, quite right." Linton reached for the pill she had prepared for him, earlier his hand trembling slightly. Whether from illness or excitement, I couldn't tell. As he swallowed the tablet with wine, Dr. Peaton watched with professional interest. "Edgar, I must insist you consider the strain you're placing on your heart. This level of stress, my heart will endure long enough to see justice done," Linton replied curtly, unlike some people's consciences. The comment hung in the air like smoke. Lady Evelyn attempted to lighten the mood with a story about a recent society scandal, but the damage was done. Dr. Peaton excused himself from the table, claiming he needed to check on another lodge member's medication. As the evening progressed, Linton's condition seemed to worsen. His color grew increasingly pale, and perspiration beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Miss Sinclair watched him with growing alarm. "Edgar," she whispered urgently, "perhaps we should postpone your presentation. You don't look well." "I'm fine," he insisted, though his voice had grown hoarse. "Just the excitement of finally exposing the truth. After tonight, the lodge will be cleansed of its corruption, sir." Gerard raised his glass for the evening's toast. "To truth, justice, and the restoration of our lodge's honor." The hall rose as one, glasses raised. But as Linton stood to join the toast, he suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. "Edgar!" Miss Sinclair reached for him, but it was too late. Linton pitched forward with a strangled gasp, his briefcase tumbling from his grip as he collapsed across the table, sending crystal and china crashing. The hall erupted in chaos. Dr. Peaton, despite his earlier departure, appeared almost immediately at Linton's side, his medical training taking precedence over their recent friction. "Stand back. Give him air," he shouted, checking for a pulse with professional efficiency. "Someone call an ambulance!" But even I could see it was hopeless. Edgar Linton's crusade for truth had ended with devastating finality. In the confusion that followed, guests screaming, waiters running, Sir Gerard attempting to restore order, I noticed Poirot standing calmly at the edge of the chaos, his eyes taking in every detail. His gaze moved methodically from the scattered pills on the floor to the faces of those closest to Linton, finally settling on the empty space where the briefcase had fallen. "Mon Dieu," he murmured as I reached his side. "How quickly evidence vanishes in a moment of crisis." I looked down. The briefcase was indeed gone, vanished in the confusion of the medical emergency. Chapter 3. Shadows and Suspicions. If there's one lesson I've learned in my years with Poirot, it's that death transforms a room as surely as overturning the furniture. The Grand Canforth rooms, recently a stage for Masonic fellowship, now felt heavy with unspoken questions and barely contained fear. Inspector Japp arrived within 20 minutes, his usual genial manner replaced by professional efficiency. He surveyed the scene with experienced eyes before approaching Sir Gerard for a preliminary briefing. "Natural death, you'd say?" he inquired after hearing the basic facts. "Heart failure," Dr. Peaton confirmed, still kneeling beside the body. Edgar had a serious cardiac condition. The stress of recent weeks combined with tonight's excitement. It was inevitable. "Really? Inevitable?" Poirot murmured to me. "That is a word that often conceals more than it reveals." Japp organized the scene with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we'll need statements from everyone present. Purely routine, you understand. Dr. Peaton, I'll want a full medical assessment, and we'll need the coroner's opinion before releasing the body." "Of course, Inspector," Dr. Peaton replied. "Though I should warn you, Edgar's condition was deteriorating rapidly. I'd been urging him to reduce his activities, but he wouldn't listen." "So, you expected this to happen?" Japp asked pointedly. "Not tonight specifically, but soon. The man was killing himself with stress and overwork." Japp began his own quiet investigation, moving among the guests with his characteristic tact. I followed, notebook in hand, ready to record any significant observations. Approached John Avery first, finding him standing nervously near the windows. "Mr. Avery, a difficult evening for The Lodge." "Terrible business," Avery agreed, mopping his brow. "Poor Edgar. I tried to warn him this crusade would be the death of him. We had words at dinner. In fact, I told him he was destroying the Brotherhood. With his accusations, that good men's reputations were at stake. You argued with him publicly?" "Not argued exactly. More of a firm disagreement. I'd sent him a note earlier this week trying to convince him to moderate his approach. My business depends on the lodge's reputation, Mr. Poirot. These scandals could ruin half the membership." Next, Poirot spoke with Lady Evelyn, who'd composed herself admirably despite the evening's trauma. "Such a tragedy," she said, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Edgar was so passionate about his investigation, but the strain was clearly too much. You were concerned about his health. We all were. I even sent him a note myself, warning him about the dangers of stirring up old scandals. Some secrets are better left buried, don't you think? And yet, Poirot observed, the lodge leadership seemed to support his efforts. Publicly, yes. but privately, many of us worried about the consequences. Edgar had become obsessed. He saw corruption everywhere, suspected everyone. Sir Gerard, when approached, seemed genuinely grief-stricken. Edgar was a true friend to the lodge, he said heavily. His investigation was necessary, even if some of us questioned his methods. You had concerns about his methods. I worried about his health mainly, and the public nature of his accusations. It seemed unnecessarily dramatic. I sent them a note this week asking him to consider a more measured approach, but Edgar was convinced that dramatic action was required. Finally, Poirot spoke with Miss Sinclair, who appeared devastated by her employer's death. "He was such a good man," she said through tears. "He only wanted to protect the lodge's honor, but the stress, the threatening letters he'd been receiving, it was all too much." "Threatening letters, mademoiselle?" "Typed notes warning him to stop his investigation. They came several times a week. Edgar tried to hide how much they affected him, but I could see the strain. And tonight you reminded him about his medication." "Yes." Dr. Petton had been very specific about the timing, always with food, never on an empty stomach. Edgar was so focused on his work, he sometimes forgot. I'd been helping him keep track. As the evening wore on and statements were taken, a troubling picture began to emerge. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Linton had been receiving anonymous threats, that several lodge members had sent him cautionary notes, and that his health had been deteriorating under the pressure. But it was Dr. Petton's account that proved most interesting. When Japp pressed him for details about Linton's condition, the doctor's responses seemed oddly evasive. His heart was severely compromised, Petton explained. The medication helped, but only marginally. Any significant stress could have triggered a fatal episode. "And you'd warned him about this repeatedly?" "I'd even offered to provide him with stronger medication, but he preferred to maintain his current regimen." "Stronger medication?" Poirot inquired quietly. "Higher-dose digitalis tablets, sometimes necessary for advanced cardiac cases, but Edgar insisted his regular pills were sufficient." "Where might one obtain such higher-dose medications?" Poirot asked innocently. "Any major hospital pharmacy," Petton replied. "They're available for legitimate medical purposes, of course, strictly controlled. Though I should mention, while higher doses can be helpful in some cases, they can also be dangerous if not properly monitored." Edgar's condition was delicate, and I felt his current dosage was appropriate given his overall health status. As the last of the guests gave their statements and departed, Poirot stood in contemplation near the spot where Linton had fallen. The briefcase was indeed missing, and despite thorough questioning, no one admitted to seeing what had become of it. "Curious, don't you think, Hastings?" he murmured. "A man dies of his heart condition, yet his most prized possession vanishes in the confusion." "Do you suspect foul play?" I asked. "I suspect, mon ami, that we have only begun to uncover the truth about Edgar Linton's death." Chapter 4. Secrets of the Lodge. The following morning brought Inspector Japp to our flat earlier than expected, his expression grim as he settled into Poirot's second-best chair. "The coroner's preliminary findings are troubling," he announced, without preamble. Linton died of cardiac arrest as expected, but the level of digitalis in his system was problematic. "In what way problematic?" Poirot inquired, setting aside his morning correspondence. "Too high, potentially lethal, even for someone with his condition. Either he took several pills at once, which seems unlikely given Miss Sinclair's careful monitoring, or someone substituted his regular medication with something stronger. And Dr. Petton's reaction to this news? Defensive, to say the least. Claims it's impossible, that Linton must have been hoarding pills or taking extra doses. But here's the interesting bit. When we checked the hospital pharmacy records, we found that Peyton had signed out high-concentration digitalis tablets just 2 days ago. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Good Lord, he had access to the very medication that killed Linton. So it appears. Claims it was for another patient, Boutet's been remarkably vague about the details. Poirot leaned forward with interest. And what of Monsieur Linton's missing briefcase? Still no trace. But we did discover something interesting when we searched his office yesterday. Miss Sinclair led us to a private safe. Apparently, Linton kept copies of his most sensitive documents separate from his main files, and these documents revealed evidence of systematic fraud in the lodge's property transactions, just as he claimed. Properties sold far below market value with suspiciously convenient medical certifications, declaring certain elderly members mentally incompetent to vote against the sales. Medical certifications provided by? Poirot asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Dr. Peyton. In every case. And here's the damning part. Some of these certifications were issued after the members had died, but backdated too before the relevant votes. The implications were staggering. So Peyton was not just complicit in the fraud, he was orchestrating it. Appears so, using his medical authority to provide legal justification for questionable property sales. Very clever, really. Who questions a doctor's professional assessment? But surely the families of these deceased members would have contested such diagnoses? I protested. But that's the beauty of it, Japp explained grimly. The certifications were kept strictly confidential, filed only with lodge records. The families never knew their relatives had been declared mentally incompetent posthumously. Poirot had been silent during this exchange, his fingers steepled in concentration. Tell me, Inspector, what did you discover about Dr. Peyton's financial circumstances? Interesting, you should ask. Turns out, the good doctor has been living well beyond his medical practice's income, large cash deposits in his personal accounts, always coinciding with the dates of major property sales. And his explanation for these deposits? Claims they're payments from private patients who prefer to pay in cash for discretion. Convenient, but difficult to verify. What about his behavior at the banquet? I asked. He seemed nervous from the start, and he disappeared from the table just before Linton's collapse. According to witnesses, he excused himself to check on another member's medication. But here's the odd thing. No other member recalls receiving medical attention from him that evening. Poirot stood and began pacing, a sure sign that his little gray cells were working furiously. The pattern becomes clear, mon ami. Dr. Peyton used his medical position to facilitate property fraud, profiting handsomely from each transaction. When M. Linton's investigation threatened to expose him, he resorted to murder, using his medical knowledge to make it appear natural. But how did he manage the substitution? Miss Sinclair was handling Linton's medication, and she seems genuinely devoted to her employer. But consider the sequence of events, Poirot replied. Dr. Peyton had ample opportunity during the cocktail reception to examine Linton's pills. He could have substituted 1 or 2 regular tablets with high-dose versions during that examination, and Miss Sinclair would have been none the wiser. She'd simply given him what she believed was his regular medication. Exactly. A perfect murder, or so Dr. Peyton believed. The victim's known heart condition would mask the true cause of death, and his medical expertise would go unquestioned. There's just one problem with that theory, Japp said quietly. We've arrested Dr. Peyton, but he's demanding to see you, Poirot. Claims he has something to tell you that will change everything. Indeed? Poirot's eyebrows rose. How very interesting. Perhaps, Inspector, we should hear what the good doctor has to say. Chapter 5. False Leads and Red Herrings. The detention cell at New Scotland Yard was hardly the sort of place one expects to encounter a respected physician. Yet there sat Dr. Marcus Peaton, his usual professional composure replaced by barely contained desperation. When we entered with Inspector Japp, he looked up with relief so palpable it was almost painful to witness. "Mr. Poirot, thank God you've come," he said, rising unsteadily. "I know how this must appear, but you must believe me. I didn't kill Edgar Linton." "The evidence suggests otherwise, Doctor," Poirot replied calmly, taking a seat across from the prisoner. "Your access to lethal medications, your financial motive, your opportunity during the banquet." Yes, I understand all that. But there's something you don't know. Something I couldn't tell Inspector Japp because it would destroy another person's reputation unnecessarily. Poirot leaned forward with interest. "Go on, then. Let's hear this revelation." Peaton ran his hands through his hair, looking older than his years. "I did sign out those high-dose digitalis tablets, just as you discovered, but not for Edgar Linton. For myself." "For yourself?" I exclaimed. "But you appear to be in perfect health." "Physically, yes. But I've been struggling with certain personal demons, Mr. Poirot, gambling debts that have spiraled out of control. Those cash deposits in my account, they weren't from the property fraud. They were loans from very unpleasant people who don't accept late payments graciously." "You're claiming the property sales were legitimate?" Poirot asked skeptically, as though far as I knew, yes. "I provided medical certifications when requested by the Lodge Committee, but I never questioned their purpose. The elderly members I examined were indeed showing signs of mental deterioration. I documented what I observed in good faith, and the backdated certifications." Peaton's face crumpled. I may have been careless with dates on occasion. When you're desperate for money, you don't always maintain proper record-keeping standards. But I swear to you, I never knowingly participated in fraud." "Then explain the high-dose digitalis," Japp demanded. "I took the tablets, intending to end my own troubles permanently. The gambling debts, the shame of what I'd become. It seemed the only way out. But when Edgar collapsed, I realized how it would look. A doctor with access to cardiac medications present when a heart patient dies. Unexpectedly, so I destroyed the tablets," Poirot guessed. "Flushed them down the hospital lavatory that very night. I panicked, thinking I'd be accused of murder when my real crime was contemplating suicide." The story was plausible, even sympathetic. But something about Peaton's manner troubled me. He seemed to be holding back still more information. "Doctor," Poirot said gently, "there is something else, n'est-ce pas? Something you observed that evening that troubles you." Peaton hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "It's about Miss Sinclair. I noticed something during dinner that didn't seem significant at the time, but given what's happened." "Yes?" "When Edgar took his medication, I was watching from a medical standpoint. You understand? I was concerned about his condition. The pill he swallowed appeared different from the ones it prescribed. Slightly larger, different shape. At the time, I assumed he'd switched to a different brand or dosage. And now I wonder if someone had already substituted his regular medication." Miss Sinclair had been handling his pills a leavening, reminding him when to take them. She had complete access to his pill box. This was a disturbing development. I'd found Miss Sinclair's devotion to her employer rather touching. But if Peaton was telling the truth, what possible motive could she have? I wondered aloud. "I'm not certain," Peaton admitted. "But I did overhear her speaking French on the telephone several times recently. Heated conversations about money and family obligations, and she seemed unusually interested in Edgar's investigation, always asking questions about what he'd discovered. After leaving Peaton, we made our way directly to Linton's office, where Miss Sinclair was attempting to sort through her late employer's papers. She looked up as we entered, her eyes red from crying. "Gentlemen, I wasn't expecting you. I'm trying to organize Mr. Linton's affairs, but it's so overwhelming." "Mademoiselle," Poirot began carefully, "we have learned some troubling information about the circumstances of Monsieur Linton's death. Dr. Python has suggested that his medication may have been tampered with." Her reaction was immediate and seemingly genuine, shock followed by indignation. How dare he? Dr. Peaton was the one acting strangely that evening, disappearing from the table, making excuses. If anyone tampered with Edgar's pills, it was him. Yet, Dr. Peaton claims to have observed differences in the medication you gave to M. Linton. "He's lying to save himself," she protested. "I gave Edgar the same pills he'd been taking for months. I would never harm him. He was like a father to me." "We understand your uncle is a member of the lodge," I interjected. "Reginald Sinclair. His name appears in some of the property transaction records." Miss Sinclair's face went pale. "My uncle is an honorable man. If his name is in those records, it's because he wagering to protect the lodge's interests, not exploit them." "But surely you can understand why Dr. Pemberton might suspect your motives," Poirot said gently. "If your uncle's reputation were threatened by Monsieur Linton's investigation." "My uncle has nothing to hide," she snapped, then immediately seemed to regret her vehemence. "I'm sorry, gentlemen, I'm not myself today." The shock of losing Edgar combined with these terrible accusations. "Of course, mademoiselle, but perhaps you could help us understand. What exactly was your uncle's role in the property transactions?" She hesitated, clearly torn between loyalty and truthfulness. "Uncle Reginald served on the property committee for several years. He may have made some decisions that appear questionable in hindsight, but his intentions were always honorable." "What sort of decisions?" "Sales that perhaps should have been delayed, votes that might have been cast differently if all the facts had been known. But he was deceived, Mr. Poirot, manipulated by others who had their own agenda." As we prepared to leave, Miss Sinclair made one final plea. "Please don't let Dr. Peaton escape justice by blaming me. Edgar trusted me completely. I would have died before betraying that trust." Walking back to our lodgings, I found myself more confused than ever. I say, "Poirot, who are we to believe?" Peaton seemed genuinely distraught, but then sobbed Miss Sinclair. "Indeed, Hastings, both stories are plausible. Both contain elements of truth. But somewhere in these competing narratives lies the key to our puzzle. Do you suspect Miss Sinclair? After all, I suspect, mon ami, that we have not yet heard the complete truth from anyone involved. Tomorrow we must dig deeper into the lodge's financial records and the role of Uncle Reginald. The answers we seek may lie not in who had access to the pills, but in who had the most to lose from Monsieur Linton's revelations." Chapter 6. The Final Deduction. The next morning found Poirot in deep contemplation over his breakfast, his green eyes distant with thought. He had been unusually quiet since our disturbing interview with Dr. Peaton the previous afternoon, and I could tell his little gray cells were working furiously. "Hastings," he said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup with decisive finality, "I believe we have been approaching this case from the wrong angle entirely." "How do you mean?" "We have been following the evidence as it was presented to us, but we have not been thinking about the psychology of the crime. Consider who truly benefited from M. Linton's death." Before I could answer, he was already reaching for the telephone. Inspector Japp? Here. I require your assistance most urgently. Can you meet us at our flat? Within the hour? Excellent. And bring with you the lodge's financial records, particularly anything relating to John Avery's access to property valuations and committee procedures. When Japp arrived, slightly breathless from his haste, Poirot was ready for him with a series of precise questions. Inspector, I have been considering the psychology of our suspects. Dr. Peaton, a man desperate enough to consider suicide, gambling debts mounting. Such a person might commit fraud, but murder? To kill would only make his situation worse, bring more scrutiny. This is not the psychology of our killer. Then who? Japp began, but Poirot held up a hand. Consider instead Monsieur Avery. At the banquet, I observed his behavior most carefully. He spoke of reputation, of damage to the Brotherhood, but notice, he was not defensive like a guilty man, but controlling like a man trying to manage a situation. Tell me, what do your financial records reveal about his access to large property information? Japp consulted his files. Avery had complete access to all property records as secretary. He could create reports, modify valuations, even backdate documents, if needed. Précisément. And what of his financial circumstances? A man in his position with such access, surely he has been living within his means. Actually, now that you mention it, our preliminary examination shows Avery has been making some rather large expenditures recently. New motor car, expensive furnishings for his office. Exactement. You see, Hastings, the psychology becomes clear. Dr. Peaton's gambling made him desperate and careless, perfect for manipulation by someone cleverer. But who was clever enough to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme? Poirot began pacing, his excitement growing. Inspector, I believe if you examine the lodge records more carefully, you will find that Monsieur Avery has been creating false financial reports about lodge properties, convincing the committee that valuable assets were liabilities requiring quick sale. Japp was frantically taking notes. You think Avery was manipulating the property sales? I am certain of it. And Dr. Peaton's medical certifications. They were not his idea, but Avery's. The secretary would identify elderly members likely to oppose profitable sales, then arrange for convenient medical examinations. Peaton's gambling desperation made him compliant. He would certify mental incompetence when pressured, especially if dates needed to be adjusted. Good Lord, I breathed. So Avery was the mastermind, using Peaton as his medical rubber stamp. Exactment. But this brings us to our most tragic element, the corruption of innocence. Miss Sinclair, with her devotion to her uncle and her employer, becomes the perfect unwitting weapon. I looked confused. How do you mean? Think, Inspector. Avery knew that Miss Sinclair's uncle was on the property committee, knew that she was concerned about protecting his reputation. What better way to stop Linton's investigation than to convince his own secretary that she was protecting innocent people? You think Avery manipulated Miss Sinclair into poisoning Linton? I'm certain of it. Inspector, I believe you'll find correspondence between Avery and Miss Sinclair. You see, Avery's psychology demands documentation. He is a man who keeps meticulous records, as evidenced by his role as lodge secretary. Such a controlling personality would not rely on verbal manipulation alone when dealing with something so crucial. He would need to convince Miss Sinclair through written arguments, building his case systematically. I suspect these letters will show how he convinced her that her uncle would be destroyed by false accusations, that Linton's investigation needed to be postponed to give innocent people time to prepare their defense. Poirot's voice grew gentle but firm. I believe you will find that Avery provided her with what he claimed were harmless sedatives. Consider Miss Sinclair's genuine horror when she discovered Linton had died. This was not the reaction of a willing accomplice to murder, but of someone who believed she was administering something benign. Her psychology tells us she would never have acted if she knew the true consequences. Therefore, Avery must have deceived her about the nature of what she was giving Linton, likely telling her they were mild sedatives that would simply make him feel unwell enough to postpone his presentation, giving her uncle time to prepare his defense. But surely someone should have suspected. The man was desperate enough to kill. There must have been signs, it protested. But that is precisely Avery's genius, Hastings. He appeared to be the most loyal supporter of the lodge, the man working hardest to preserve its reputation. Who would suspect such dedication of being a facade? And where does one obtain hospital-graded digitalis without legitimate medical credentials? Poirot continued. Inspector, I suspect you will find that Monsieur Avery has been using forged medical documents to access pharmaceutical supplies. Japp was already reaching for his telephone. I'll have my men search Avery's office immediately, if what you're suggesting is true. It is true, mon ami. The psychology is perfect. Avery needed to stop Linton's investigation, but he could not be seen to oppose it openly without arousing suspicion. So he manipulated others, Peaton through his gambling desperation, Miss Sinclair through her family loyalty, turning their virtues into weapons. Within 2 hours, Japp returned with confirmation of Poirot's deductions. Avery's office had yielded damning evidence, correspondence with Miss Sinclair discussing her uncle's dangerous position, financial records showing kickbacks from property buyers, and forged medical credentials used to obtain digitalis from hospital pharmacies. Remarkable, Poirot, said Japp, settling back into a chair after returning from the arrests. You deduced the entire scheme from psychological observation alone. Avery broke down completely when confronted with your analysis. The psychology, Poirot replied. It is everything in such cases. Physical evidence can be fabricated, alibis can be constructed, but the human heart, it always reveals the truth to those who know how to read it. Miss Sinclair, when confronted with the evidence of Avery's manipulation, broke down completely. Her genuine horror at discovering she had been used to commit murder was heartbreaking to witness. Even hardened by years of criminal investigation, Japp seemed moved by her obvious remorse. She really believed she was protecting people, he said quietly as she was led away. Avery convinced her that a mild sedative would simply postpone Linton's presentation, giving her uncle time to prepare his defense against false accusations. The greatest crimes, Poirot observed sadly, are not those committed by evil men, but those that corrupt good people into becoming instruments of evil. Edgar Linton died not from hatred, but from love. Love that was twisted into betrayal by a master manipulator who understood the human heart all too well. Epilogue: The Price of Truth. 3 months later, as autumn painted London in shades of regret and renewal, I found myself thinking not of justice served, but of innocence lost. You are contemplating the price of truth, mon ami, Poirot observed with that uncanny ability to read my thoughts. I set down the morning paper, which contained news of Avery's sentencing, 15 years for fraud and manslaughter. I was thinking about Miss Sinclair. How does one recover from such betrayal? Her love for family turned into a weapon against the man who trusted her most. Perhaps the question is not how one recovers, but how one transforms such experience into purpose. Lady Evelyn writes that Miss Sinclair has begun working with a charitable organization in France, one that aids victims of financial fraud. Her personal tragedy has become her mission to protect others. Outside our window, London continued its eternal dance of ambitions and secrets. But perhaps that was the lesson of the Lodge affair, that even from the deepest tragedy, some measure of good could emerge. "This case will remain with me, Hastings," Poirot said quietly, "as a reminder that our noblest impulses can become our greatest vulnerabilities in the hands of those who understand the human heart too well, but also that even the deepest betrayal can be redeemed through service to others." As Big Ben chimed the hour, I reflected that Edgar Linton's sacrifice had meaning only if it taught us wisdom without cynicism, to remain vigilant, while still trusting, to seek justice while still showing mercy. And perhaps I thought that was enough. As the lodge's shadows lift, Hercule Poirot unmasks John Avery as the mastermind, forging documents for fraud and manipulating Miss Sinclair, to poison Linton with substituted medication, all to silence his investigation. Shadows in the Masons' Hall concludes with justice served, yet echoes of corrupted loyalty linger like forgotten oaths. We hope this descent into fraternal deception has gripped you, dear listeners. Did you suspect the secretary's hidden hand? Or were you deceived by the doctor's desperation? Share your thoughts below. If Shadows in the Masons' Hall has enthralled you, please like and subscribe to Cafe Tales for more tales of suspense. Thank you for joining us, and until our next tale, may your nights be filled with intrigue and your days with clarity.